Chapter 6, Listening Effectively. What it means to listen. So listening is very important. It's the active process of taking in the information that you're hearing from somebody. So hearing is using your ears. It's the sound that you hear traveling. But listening actually requires attention and is not automatic. Two common misconceptions about listening are hearing is the same as listening, and listening is natural and effortless. So hearing is not the same as listening. We all know people with selective hearing or people that only listen to things that they're interested in or that they deem important. And then listening is natural and effortless. That's not true. Sometimes we have noise where we're preoccupied with something else. We could be worried about something. We could be hungry. We could be daydreaming. We could be missing our kids. So it is not natural all the time, and it does take some effort. The Hurrier model is a form of effective listening. So it is important to hear what someone is actually saying. So you're actively trying to listen. You're making sure that you have an understanding of what they're saying and being empathetic. Then you are remembering what they said. So that means that you're actively listening, you're sticking it into your long-term memory or even short-term, just enough time basically so you can fully reply and be supportive of the person. You will need to interpret next. So you need to keep your judgments to yourself just during the listening process so we can get some understanding. You need to interpret what they're saying. So hopefully what they said is exactly how you interpreted it. And if not, then you can ask them to re-emphasize something, to explain something more, or you could say, what I heard from you is blah, blah, blah. And is this correct? Is this really how you feel? And then we have evaluating. So also with evaluating, we're keeping our judgments to ourselves. We're thinking, is there something that we could do? Does this person just want me to listen? Do they want advice? Do they need resources? Is this person saying something that's important? Is it credible? Is it part of their own bias? Is it part of my bias? And then we have to respond. So after fully taking in what the person said, empathizing with them, fully listening, understanding it, then we can respond to them. And that's where we're not going to just have a rebuttal tendency or trying to argue competitively or interrupting competitively. We're going to have the response that is going to be appropriate for the audience and the situation. Informational listening is when we listen in order to learn something. So it could be like listening to this voice over PowerPoint, listening to the news, paying attention for directions for driving or maybe for getting somewhere. So informational listening is relatively passive process because you're kind of just sitting there and taking it in. You're not really evaluating it so much. Critical listening means we are evaluating and analyzing something while we're hearing it. So when we pay attention to things, if we're trying to see if something is valid, we can do this with people that we know, co-workers, peers. You just want to see if whatever you're being told is valid, true, is credible. Empathetic listening means we're trying to understand what the speaker is thinking or feeling. So we're taking things in from their perspective, we're holding our judgments, we have concern for the person, their feelings, and their experiences. Noise is a barrier to effective listening. So it's anything that distracts us from listening to what we wish to listen to. It could be psychological, it could be physical. As I mentioned before, you could be hungry, You could be preoccupied, you could be worried, you could be thinking about your other exams, thinking about your kids, thinking about what you need to buy on the way home. You could be listening to music. It could be really loud, it could be cold. Barriers to effective listening include pseudo listening and selective attention. So, pseudo listening is when someone's just pretending. So, pseudo means fake. Um, and selective attention is where we only listen to what we want to listen to or only part of a conversation. Information overload. So, if you think about midterms, finals, things like that, basically you're getting so much information in that it is difficult to take anything else in. It's almost like your brain is hurting, it just stops. Glazing over is another barrier. It's like where your mind wanders or you might be daydreaming while someone is speaking. Rebuttal tendency. So this is a barrier because people are thinking about replying instead of fully listening to whatever they're being told. It requires a lot of mental energy, and there's no way a person can fully pay attention if they're just waiting to rebuttal. Closed-mindedness is a barrier to effective listening. And so some people will not listen to anything that doesn't fit their confirmation bias. So they'll completely ignore any new information that goes against their current beliefs. Common barriers to effective listening would be competitive interrupting. And that would be where you're trying to speak and somebody keeps trying to interrupt you with every sentence you say or every other word. Honing your listening skills. So it's important to become a better informational listener. So separate what is said and what isn't said. Um, Sometimes you might need to read between the lines depending on the person or the situation. Also, if the person's in front of you, try to take into account body language, and if they're only on the phone, you can listen to their voice, the inflections, if they're speaking high, if they're speaking low, if they're running their words together. Um, Avoid confirmation bias. So you don't want to just hear whatever you believe. You want to hear completely whatever the other person is saying. Listen for substance more than style, avoiding the vividness effect. So you want to listen to exactly what is being said instead of something that is extremely vivid. So when something is vivid, it might be tied to your emotions. It might be something bright, something loud. So it kind of makes you listen to it more. If you think of the vividness effect, think of like the songs that young people listen to now. Um, some people will say they just listen to the beat or the sound of the song. But for me, I've always listened to the words, which is why I can't listen to quite a bit of songs nowadays because the songs don't have substance. So I don't fall into the vividness effect, at least when it comes to music. I probably do in other areas. Become a better critical listener. So it's very important to be critical of what you're hearing. Sometimes people are lying or giving out false information, or you want to be critical and see if the person even has any validity with what they're saying. Like, do they have any experience on what they're saying, or are they just talking to be talking? So it's okay to be skeptical. You might hear something, and it's always important to look it up for yourself to see if there's truth to it. You want to think about the speaker's credibility, as I already mentioned, and understand the probability. So think about, is this true? Is it not true? What's the probability that it might be true? Have you heard this person speak before? Do you have any background information when it comes to this topic? And it's okay to be critical of anybody, um, no matter what. It is important to hone your listening skills by becoming a better empathetic listener. So that just means that you fully understand what someone is dealing with and you empathize with them. You have emotions tied to what they're going through. You're sensitive to what they're telling you about. So you're going to listen non-judgmentally, acknowledge feelings, and communicate support non-verbally. So that could be patting someone's shoulder, giving them a hug, looking them in the eyes, being quiet, not smiling if they're telling you about something serious. So those will be some ways of honing your listening skills.